Hello, good evening, everybody. Small sound check. Can everybody hear me? Give this another try. Can everybody hear me? Yep. Okay. Very good. See if we can start a little bit on time today. See, if we got everybody here. Give it like another minute and we'll get cracking. Okay. So, welcome everybody. I'll just get started as more and more people will come in. I see a few new faces from the new school that we got started in this week. Taylors, welcome. So I'm TJ. I'm a specialist in highly gifted education. And we at Passend Education are on a mission to make gifted kids more happy, autonomous, and successful. And I'm hoping that within these next sessions that we're going to be doing, you guys can get a few useful tips for at home to help your gifted kids thrive. We have a few questions this week that I want to deal with, and I think they're really connected in a similar kind of topic. So I thought it would be a good opportunity to unpack them at the same time. Um, one of the questions has to do with how to keep yourself emotionally steady when you have to try and convince your kids to do the right thing as far as you're concerned, and for their own good, of course. That's an interesting question. And I think there's a lot of strategies that you can apply to help with that process. And the other one is how to reduce the defensiveness of, in this case, a teen. It's not really just teens that struggle with this, but it's definitely a little bit more common. So I thought in that frame, we will keep the question as it is. And then I'll be looking particularly today a lot about what we can have to do as parents ourselves, because to be honest, when it comes to interactions with our children, the only person as a parent that you can really control is yourself. And positive discipline and the way that we approach that in our schools and essentially with our kids really relies on the idea that you are the one in control of what you say and what you do. And I always joke that the positivity is for the kids and the discipline is for the parents. And that is really the case. Like, so discipline itself is obviously not always a bad word, but I think if you use it in the context of what can I do to be a better role model, discipline is a really positive word, right? So I want to move away from the idea that disciplining is always shouting at your kids. That's a very important one. It might also be important for the new parents here to help with a little bit of the definition of gifted kids, because giftedness is quite broad in ways being interpreted. There's been millions spent by the National Association Gifted Child in the United States. Like, I think there's a 20 million US dollar study to try and come up with a uniform definition for giftedness. And the end of like years of work and money spent was that there's just many definitions, and we're just going to have to live with that, which means that it's important for us that we have a little bit of an understanding. So giftedness is not the traditional kids on the spectrum or ADHD, like a lot of people here in Malaysia seem to think, but giftedness are creative thinkers, fast learners, that have basically the ability to learn one or more skills faster than about 95% of the population. This is often represented in a high IQ. This is how it traditionally was measured, basically. But we now know that there's a lot more breadth to what kind of talents there are. So if you're a good musician, you could be gifted as well, and you won't show up on an IQ test. But what we do see is that gifted individuals have brains that function differently, and basically they have overexcitabilities in some form. Now, these overexcitabilities can be both positive and negative. So They can be very eager to learn new things and retain information and go super deep. That's great, particularly in early years in academics. But they can also be overexcited in emotions and so on. And today, we have to tap into two particular overexcitabilities when it comes to these questions. The first one being the sense of justice. Like, a lot of gifted kids have a very strong sense of right or wrong. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they are correct in what they think is right or wrong, but the feeling about injustice, particularly inflicted on them, can be quite intense. And of course, injustice is a pretty heavy emotion. Entire countries have gone to war over them, over that particular emotion. So you can imagine that for kids that are more susceptible to emotional distress, that basically that particular overexcitability is something really difficult for them to handle, particularly because they're also quite clever. They can see quite far down the line of like logical reasoning. And what we tend to be pretty poor at when we educate kids in the beginning is to sort of oversimplify a lot of things. And then you get kids going like, yeah, but that doesn't make sense. So there's a lot of misaligned trust that they struggle with. So that sense of injustice that is there. And then also a lot of them have a very strong sense of ego. Both positive and negative, because like obviously a lot of them tend to be quite well performing early on in their academic careers, but this sense of ego can get in the way too. So when we interact with them and we say, hey, let's figure out ways to maybe not make certain kind of mistakes or avoid pitfalls that we as parents have maybe run into ourselves, they might reject that idea, particularly if it challenges the idea that I am quite smart and I know what to do. So let's look at the first question. How do I keep myself from being emotionally exhausted? Great. So before we can answer that particular question, we have to ask ourselves then, what do we mean? What is the definition for emotional exhaustion in this? And that is obviously not like a simple one type of answer that you can put in there. What happens is like you need to ask yourself, like, okay, what kind of emotional distress or exhaustion am I facing? And there's a few categories, like there's a lot of symptoms that people tend to mention, but the three categories that I think are kind of useful to use to frame your own mind in. And the first one is like, okay, is it overwhelm, right? So is it a sense of feeling you have to do things with the kids? And do you feel like you have almost no choice in the matter? So are you overwhelmed by the amount of challenges that you see the kids need to overcome? Right? Because that feeling of being overwhelmed, I'm sure a lot of you have had that at work or anything else, is kind of it's very frustrating, it's very anxious, it's scary, right? So there's a lot of fear involved in this. So is this fear? And that is an interesting thing to ask as well, because fear sometimes it's like, okay, I'm worried that they won't achieve what I want, therefore this is something I really want to push through, and my kid is pushing back, and oh, it's so difficult. Or is it anger, right? Do you feel that the child is just like, are they supposed to listen to you? And which one of those two emotions is it? Because there is a bit of a difference between how you should respond based on which one of the two those are. And I'll go a little bit more detail a little bit further. Luckily, a lot of the strategy to really deal with that, what we want to deal with, follows similar steps. But it is important because fear, when you're scared of something, the way to overcome this is through exposure therapy, which means you have to sort of face your fears. You have to build courage, right? Which doesn't always mean that you have to give in to the child. That's definitely not what I'm saying here. But if you are responding to the child and they are trying to assert that I want to do something different, and if you come from a state of fear, the way that you will approach that conversation is, and fear is really, really tough. In our brains, when fear triggers, it makes it very hard for us to logically think. Fight or flight responses are the result of that. So you could tip into anger, which is quite common, or you can retreat and get away from the situation, which is also quite common. But in that emotional state, what is happening is that like our brains are really not capable of using our prefrontal cortex and making sensible decisions anymore. So we start reacting quite, yeah, often quite strongly, or we freeze. Like that is also a version of that. So like you need to ask yourself again, what am I facing? And then based on that, you have to then decide, okay, if this is fear, I need to face I need to build up the courage to face it, which means you actually have to try and actually look for these kind of situations a bit more frequently so you can get used to that particular emotion so that you can keep your cool, as it were. And with fear, like with anger, that's slightly different, because anger is also a sense of powerlessness. It's basically you're switching from trying to use words to normally using physical aggression, which is really a last kind of resort. And to be honest, like if fear or if anger is the part where you're in, then I actually think at that point it will be more important for you to sort of look at like little ways of help. One way, of course, is watching these videos, but it is really good with anger to sort of release anger, which means if your partner is there, like talking about these kind of situations, so that you can anticipate the triggers and what kind of things set you off. One teacher a long time, like a while back in the Netherlands, I was talking to him, where basically parents were making quite a lot of headway, but a very strong boy. But then eventually the boy pushed certain kind of buttons, and the dad unfortunately got quite physical with this child on occasion. And what really happened in that situation is like initially sometimes the kids even started doing what they wanted to do, but the boy got quite big, and at one point when the father said, okay, I'm going to hit your hands, the boy just took his hands out and said, I don't really care. And at that point it's completely game over. Like if once the child says like, okay, that doesn't hurt me anymore, even though that might not really be true, you have no more recourse to actually get any kind of movement with that child. So fear is obviously one that you have to be very mindful of. But I think most of the parents, when we talk about exhaustion, is what is really starting to happen is that internally our internal dialogue becomes very negative. So we start saying things that are kind of hopeless, they're kind of frustrating, and unfortunately, the way that our minds work is that like when we say things that are negative, then we tend to sort of start slowly enact those kind of those emotions out. And that has a lot to do with like how our brain patterns works when it comes to remembering things. So whenever, most of the time when you're trying to reprimand a child or trying to convince them, you're talking about something that happened in the past. Either it happened immediately there, but you tend to see, like particularly with teens, like even like when you say, okay, I'm going to talk to this person, I'm going to talk about what happened today at school, where they did something dumb, or they failed a test, or whatever it is that you feel you need to talk about. And then very unfortunately, like you're bringing back certain kind of emotion, like memories. Now, memories are a combination of emotions and thoughts and all that kind of stuff. And anytime we try to recollect emotions, the actual situation at that time also becomes part of that memory. So you're starting to pollute the original memory, for good or bad, actually, with whatever state of mind that you're in. So a lot of situations like this, particularly if this is a conversation you've had over and over and over, like it's like the saying like, "Oh, I've told you this 10 times," right? And that is probably true, and maybe the conversation was the same. But basically, the way that we remember that is already a negative thought pattern. So, like, even though the situation today might not be as bad, but because we're recollecting the stuff that happened before that and before that, it compounds and it becomes like the camel that breaks the straw that breaks the camel's back, and that is that negative thinking. So you need to help yourself get out of that particular pattern of thought. So let's look at like 7 strategies that really help. Let's start with the pause. So the pause is, count to 10. Everybody's heard it. Unfortunately, counting to 10 is actually not enough. you need about 90 seconds to decide that for the emotional, the chemical stuff in your brain to sort of tone down. So actually, when we talk about a pause, it's really not enough to just say, okay, count to 10. Right? What you need to do is a few things. First of all, you need to find a way to get a 90-second break. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, that depends a little bit of like how intense the situation is. Like the first question you need to ask yourself is the actual child safe? Right, that's an important question to ask. Like if whatever like situation you're in, is the child likely to maybe cause a ruckus, throw things? If you have kids that unfortunately do worse things to themselves, you have to ask them, can I leave that situation? Like, can I step outside of that if I need to? Because the important part here is you need to let the emotional distress or frustration that comes through you to fade away. And you need to be able to do that without triggering it. As if the kid is again like poking, asking, or maybe there's another person involved, you basically have to make sure that you can calm down. Now, there's a few ways that I like to do this, which is like a few breathing techniques. Now, I actually teach the kids that I work with these breathing techniques as well. So particularly if you have kids that can get a little bit emotional and so on, you can if they remember these kind of breathing techniques in the situation, you can do that together, which would be really good. But there's a few. Like most people know box breathing, where you breathe in for 3 seconds, hold it for 3 seconds, then breathe out for 3 seconds, hold it for 3 seconds, and then repeat the whole cycle. Right. So that is box breathing. One that I particularly like is a physiological sigh. This one basically means you're sort of trying to recreate like when you sigh. Like most of you have probably done that before. We were like, okay, and sighing actually is really there to release stress. And you can actually make a sort of a supercharged version of that by breathing in through your nose, and then before you breathe out, you breathe in again. So that's and then you do that like once or twice. Now, obviously, that's normally not really enough to make 90 seconds. The box breathing is a little bit easier in that context there. And actually, if you have children that have pause routines, so one of the opportunities that you have, like working with us, for example, is that if the kids have emotional challenges, we'll sometimes help them build pause routines. And these are code worded like routines where we start off with like, okay, taking a bit of like a mental pause, then doing breathing, then doing some kind of related exercise. So it could be solving the side of a Rubik's Cube, or it could be tying a particular knot in a string. One of the kids that I have like solves prime numbers more difficult. Like, so he goes up like he's at 500 and something right now, but when in my sessions, so he's gotten a long way. But basically, something that can keep your mind off of things. And now, some people that know how to meditate a little bit could even use that. So you can really say, okay, I am taking a pause. I'm taking a 90-second break, and this should give you a little bit of time to reflect. Right. So once you've taken that break, then you should be able to start responding a little bit better. Right. So that's one strategy. And one I can recommend with your kids is practice these. So try to practice that in situations where where you haven't really lost control yet, but you might in other occasions, and then kind of model and prepare this. That would be one of the great ways of helping out with that. So that's the pause routine. Then, what is the second thing that you can do? What is another strategy? Well, first of all, in order for you to be able to manage your emotions, you need to understand what are things that trigger them. And generally speaking, when again, as I do this with the kids as well, but this works really well for you yourself as well. Like, you should basically consider the following. You have a trigger, right? Which is technically outside of you. So it's normally something else that causes this particular trigger. And then, right, you have, well, on the inside, you have the emotion itself. so the emotion itself, you have your thoughts, and then you have your action. Okay. So the trigger triggers an emotion, that triggers a thought, that triggers an action, and then that normally goes back to a trigger, and then you've got a cycle going. So what you need to ask yourself is like, what are these triggers? What are things that can push my buttons? Just knowing them will allow you to anticipate them a little bit more. Now, if these triggers are fear related, just thinking about these triggers will trigger fear in you, which is really good. Give me a quick second, eh? Boys are having a lot of fun in their room. So yeah, okay. Um, so just thinking about a trigger will bring part of the emotions there. So talking about them, thinking about them, writing them down is a good way to actually face fear and deal with that. So that's your planning part. Like that, and again, like this can be hard for some of us, like because maybe we've never done that before. What you can do is like if you can't, if you feel you can't share this with somebody else, just take a notepad, and during the weeks that you are that things are happening, try to take a little bit of notes and go, okay, like this happened, this is how that made me feel. That's the only really thing you need. Like you can, if you want, you can actually write the actions down. You can even write the time down if you like. So that's really up to you. But and honestly, this isn't like an exact science. So like if you forget to do this, and at the end of the day, you go, oh, actually, I should have written some down. You know what? I will do it now. That's okay. Now you do that for a week or so, and you should see kind of a pattern, which allows you then to see, oh, okay, these are interesting triggers. You might see patterns like, oh, this actually happens just before dinner, which means maybe you're hungry and angry at the same time. But this is important. Like so, this particular planning step is really key to help you prevent this from happening. Point number three is about positive self-talk. So it's very similar to what I was saying about negative thinking. So like obviously the positive version of that is positive self-talk. And this is not just in how you talk to your kids about yourself, or to your spouse about yourself, or your family about yourself, but also how you think. And most of us have an inner dialogue. Not everybody does, but most people have a bit of an inner dialogue. And we tend to be kind of poor in having a kind conversation with ourselves. Now, these kind of unkind thoughts, like, okay, like, I'm not good at this, I can't do that, like, I'm just an angry person, or I'm just a sad person, these kind of things, it's like, oh, those are very negative thoughts. And when you talk these out, when you speak these out, you are reinforcing them. And we call that sort of neurolinguistic programming in a way, like a lot of things, like even how you write your emails and things, like you have to basically turn that into positivity. Now, one good example of this, and is why I drew a little fish here, that maybe some of you have heard of the fish theory before. Fish theory is basically like this one self-help book that came out a while back. The name of the person who wrote it escapes me at the moment, but it's a psychologist that basically was buying fish at a fish market in San Francisco. And this fish market, which he went into, there was a row of people outside. She was like, okay, that's interesting. What's going on? And she walked in, and this place, which is like smelly and like people have been up since, I don't know, 3 o'clock. It's really hard work. There was a bunch of people inside there selling fish that they caught that morning, and they were having fun, like throwing fish around, like really enjoying themselves. It was like a big spectacle. Like people come in and say, like, I want this fish. They would talk to the customers with the fish, stuff like that. But very silly, but a lot of fun. And she observed them doing this day in, day out. And at one point, she stepped in and said, "Hey, can I ask you something? Like, how come you do this terrible job, yet you are so happy?" And what they had agreed on in that shop is they said, actually, we've just decided that, like, yes, we are doing a miserable job, but if we agree with each other that we're just going to talk positively and be positive about it and decide internally to be positive, we will be happy about it. So they had a question that they would ask each other. It's like, have you made your choice? And that was referring to them basically waking up in the morning, sitting on the bed, and then saying, okay, what am I going to be today? Am I going to be happy or am I going to be sad? And then the answer should always be, well, if I have a choice, I'm going to be happy. So the internal monologue was, I will be happy. I should be. And they would trigger like the choice with each other. If somebody was not feeling it, that they say, hey, it doesn't look like you've made your choice. Can you make your choice, please? And then they would basically go back to the back, sit down, take a minute to calm down. So that should be a little bit familiar. And then they would make a choice. So with positive self-talk, I find that you can do the same thing. And I know it sounds bonkers, but you can do this. It's just, and it will feel odd at first, but it's like any other kind of skill. You have to practice this. You have to try and work this out. Okay, then the next one. This is a bit of a change in frame. So we have discipline, right? But like when we talk about discipline with these kids, actually what you're doing is you're looking at an opportunity to teach. One of the I think the biggest shift you can have as both an educator and a parent to really feel like, okay, you know what, it will be okay, which is a kind of like the point of asking, how do I manage my own emotions in this, is to really say, okay, what is the point of all this? Like, what are we doing? And strife and difficulty and all these kind of things, they are a feature of life. Like they're never really going to go away. So in the early stages of the kid's development, strife is an opportunity to actually learn how to how to do this, right? So you need to basically have a think about, okay, if I get this opportunity next, what is the thing that I can teach my child to really prepare them for how I want them to be when they're grown up? And how can we use this little bit of difficulty as a way for us to figure out a way how to support the child, even if they actually say, no, this is my boundary, I don't want this. Because boundaries themselves, like being fully agreeable or not, like that, you don't want your kids to be 100% agreeable, because if they agree to everything you say, they're going to agree to everything other people say as well. And we know that people that are too agreeable are not as successful as people are not agreeable. The difference is that they need to learn how to communicate their disagreement constructively within the boundaries that would keep them safe. So again, like discipline itself, the opportunity to have to potentially discipline a child is an opportunity to teach, not to. So don't say discipline at all. It's like teaching them something. And then imagine that like you have had a lot more practice than them, right? So they know less about how the world really works, particularly when it comes to delayed gratification stuff, because generally speaking, as we know with gifted kids, the delayed gratification loops are kind of messed up because they're way more intelligent than a majority of people. So the tasks that they're asked to do and the payoffs that come with them are often not aligned. Therefore, they don't really want to do these jobs, and they can sometimes see through the facade of some of the things that with delayed gratification that it is. Because, for example, like getting a good grade itself is kind of meaningless. Like the grade itself will represent like an opportunity in the future. So the reward isn't the grade, the reward is the potential opportunity when it comes either through university or a job. Right? But if you're a child and you can just go like, yeah, but like that's just a grade, it's not worth anything to me. Now that disconnect, like we don't necessarily understand, because we have gone through that loop. We have graduated, we have gotten our actual diploma, and we've probably had a job as a result of it. So we know that there's light at the end of the tunnel, but for a lot of these kids, there isn't, right? So you need to keep that in mind, like change that frame. Like how could you get them to think that far ahead? And when we're in an emotional loop, then unfortunately none of that logic works. So it's going to be very hard to convince them that like it'd be good for them to do this now if they're angry, upset. And then because some of us then don't understand like that they can't see this, we get angry, upset, and then it becomes like like something that feeds on each other. So, and that sort of leads next to the nice point. You need to model your behavior. So what do you want to really see happen with your kids? So are you sometimes also easy to get angry? So, or are you, when other people tell you things that you don't like, are you kind of defensive? You'd be surprised how much of what the kids are doing, like, and it isn't always everything because there's multiple parents, there's multiple people, but almost all of it is kind of a mirror of something somewhere. So which mirror is that? Now, if that is you, like what do I need to do to change that modeling behavior? Like what can I show them? So this is not easy. Like I'm hoping that we can invite a lot of you parents like to come and see us after Chinese New Year for our face-to-face sessions in this, because we can basically do role plays and really figure out, okay, like what are the things that are difficult, because what words you use, like positive word, negative words, is kind of tricky and it requires a bit of practice. And then you'll be surprised in how much in these kind of role plays, how much actual emotions tend to come up. So so join these kind of sessions. But from modeling, actually, you need to also repair, because most of the time when we're talking about like, okay, how do I keep my own emotions in check? There's probably some kind of conflict. And that could look like angry shouting. It could be like the kids retreating. Like there's versions of that too. And one of the very common ways that we then, like when things escalating a little bit too far, we have tendency to be really bad at repairing the relationship. So we've got angry at them, and things have calmed down. We sit them down and we say, look, I'm sorry I yelled at you, or anything else. And then what happens is almost most parents, unfortunately, go, but I don't think you should have done this. Now, what you're actually doing here is you're basically sort of gaslighting them into saying like, I've given you an apology, but it's not really an apology. Like I've apologized. Yeah, but like I've just said it was your fault that I acted this way. Now, it might be true that whatever action they had triggered it. Oh, I think I lost um okay, I think I lost my screen. Not sure why. Okay. Okay, I can do this without the screen as well, but I'll try to see if I can get it back first for a second. Something about an invalid broadcast. Let's see if that can be fixed. Join. No. Okay. That's very unfortunate. I think my looks like my Gmail started to update me for a second. So while that is updating, I'll try to log back in and then we'll come back. So okay, so again, repairing. What do we really need to do to repair? Now, when we want to repair, we have to stop with the but. That's the really important phrase. But this, but that. That actually doesn't apply, right? You need to, like when you say but, whatever came before it doesn't count. So when we repair, when we say, okay, I got upset, that shouldn't have happened, be really sincere about your apology and try to leave that other stuff out. There might be an opportunity to talk about that in a different kind of timing and setting, but I would really recommend to try and get the butts out of here. Now, let me still try to log in one little second with this. Okay. Give me 1 minute. I'll give this one shot, and then if not, we'll continue without this. There we go. Okay, last one. Okay, here we go. That's one. And now this one. And I think we're back. Are we? Yes. Awesome. Okay, so repairing. This is a really, really important step. And actually, if you can get really good at repairing your relationship after a blowout, after a reprimand, or whatever you are, where you're not happy, because obviously, if the situation got you to a point where your emotional state didn't feel well, I can almost guarantee that there was some form of loss of control in that particular situation. And if you want them to start apologizing for some of the stuff they do, you have to get better at apologizing to them when you do the same. And then you'll see them do the same back to you. That was more constructive, because then when you start your conversation the next time, you're kind of on even ground. That's the intent we should be working towards. And that sort of gets us to the sixth point over here, which is self-care. Right? Self-care in this particular situation is talking about your own mental state. Where are you right now? Have you slept enough? Have you eaten enough? Have you done enough exercise? These things have an impact on it. Obviously, a lot of people will know all this, but if you talking about okay, how do I help my kids? If you can't really help your own emotional states, then again, they're gonna see through that very quickly. So you need to think about if things escalate and get really frustrating, ask for help. It's okay. Right, so being aware of frustrations and things that you aren't in full control over, and it's not always immediately because of you being you. Sometimes the situations around you do cause a lot of these things to happen. Right, so what things can you do to help yourself get into the mindset to basically be there for your kids? And that can sometimes mean making sure that you don't have these conversations late at night when you're tired from work. Is there and that's the final point here, is there a particular kind of time where all of this would make more sense? Right, so timing is actually a really, really important part of this. Now, when we're talking about timing, this is about when you engage with all of this stuff. But generally speaking, and this is where, again, the pause comes in, it's don't do it when the actual situation is just happening there and then, right? So better yet, can you move it away? And one of the ways that I mean, this is as being a man myself, basically we're kind of inclined to try and fix problems rather than to listen to the emotions. But it's not unique to men, by the way. There's a lot of mommies that I know that struggle with this particular thing as well. Is that sometimes when we are frustrated and angry, we just want somebody to sort of go, okay, I'm here, that's fine. We don't really need the solution. To be honest, most of the time we know the solution, right? But again, if we go in there and say, oh, let's figure out what the real problem is right now, if the emotions are happening, that means you're extending the time it takes for the emotion to be there, because you're keep recollecting it. So you really have to give the kids time to calm down. And that sometimes means waiting a day. Now, I understand, of course, that if you have very heavy kind of conversations and difficult topics that you think need urgent help, that you go, okay, but I don't have the time to wait. Maybe this thing needs to happen tomorrow. And in those kind of situations, it's okay, well, you need to keep the boundaries, that is for sure, but it means that you're the next day or the day after, before things become an issue, you have to start working on these things already. You need to figure out how we can pick small things. Now, when we deal with kids that are very strong-willed, because being strong-willed is not necessarily a trait that is uniquely gifted, but if you have a strong-willed child, then the giftedness makes all of that amazing part of them not wanting to listen, unfortunately, a little bit worse. So when you have a strong-willed child like that, you have to basically pick your battles. You have to decide, okay, when do I stand my ground? And that is also part of that timing, right? So if you have a child that doesn't really want to follow you anywhere when they decide I don't want to go yet, like obviously it's hard to correct in a positive way if you haven't practiced that a lot when you're at friends' houses or you're in the mall and they're throwing a tantrum. It is a lot easier to sort of wait out a tantrum if you're at home and the thing that you're going for is something that it doesn't matter. Like, so let's say if you have a child who you find it difficult to get them to come along with things, then like try to model and or create a situation on a Sunday where I'll go out with just the family, for example, and then wait out these kind of tantrums or have consequences where things that they did want to do don't happen as a result, and then be quite firm about them. And the best thing that you can do is that you can actually sit them down in the family meetings, like I spoke about last week, and say, okay, this is a thing that I see that is happening. I don't like it. Let's come up with some ideas of consequences or other ways to fix it so it doesn't happen. So you get that agreement, and then that could be something along the lines of like, okay, like if let's say they want to do a certain kind of activity in the mall, you say like, okay, that only is going to happen if we can make it to the mall on time, finish our lunch at 12. Like if we end up finishing our lunch later than 12, that activity doesn't happen because we need to be back home on time. And that will be an opportunity for, say, if they then don't want to go initially, they take a long time to get ready, then you say, okay, we'll just wait it out. And you might not go to the mall. Now, and this is tough because you go, yeah, but I want to go to the mall. But the question is, do you want to have this conversation every week from now on out, here on out? Or do you want to like be firm on this for maybe one or two times? And then once you win that particular battle, you can do it, you can go to the mall forever without any fights. And when I'm talking about strong-willed, it doesn't automatically mean kids like stomping their feet. We've had strong-willed kids that were really good at just acting like a little victim, basically sad and so forth. So strong-willed is basically them deciding to not do things regardless of how hard you try. And basically what you need to do in those situations, because I can imagine when you have like kids that you're trying to correct them like this and it doesn't work, there's obviously a lot of strong-willed elements in that, is that you need to pick one or two things that you do not want to budge on. What is your line in the sand? And then you ignore everything else. And then you say, okay, I am going to focus on just this thing. And that basically means you have to have your plan in order. You have to be able to have firm but positive words for the situation. You have to be very clear about the consequences, right? So you need to plan, and you need to be able to model the behaviors in the way that you want it. So if you say this needs to happen, then make sure that like both of you are okay. So if a complaint is like, oh, my child can't get ready, and maybe one of the two of you in the situation is also a bit like, oh, I'll wait to the last moment, then maybe have a conversation about, can we make sure that we're both done at the same time? And that will help with a lot of this stuff. So if there's a few questions about this, please type them in the chat. I would love to go a little bit deeper if I need to, or but by all means, like whilst I go on to the next topic, put some questions in the chat for all of this. So let's go to the second question. Okay, how to reduce my teen's defensiveness? Obviously, this happens a lot with teens, but again, can happen with young kids too. Let's start with a really big caveat here that I think really helps reframe a lot of the frustrations and difficulties around it. So first of all, the reason that teens sort of seem to disconnect with what we're doing like has a lot to do with how we as social animals basically are wired, right? So social animals have mechanisms in their young, like so dogs have this, wolves have this as well, monkeys too are close relatives. So basically, what happens is that when the teens in a pack sort of get to adolescent stage, there is something that chemically triggers in their brain to try and look for, other places to go. So they slowly move away from the group. There's conflict even there, and then they will move out. And there's some theories around there that actually is like an incest protection mechanism. And we as humans are not as immune from this kind of thing yet. So as they go into puberty, they are sort of chemically wired to not want to listen to you. So keep that in mind. Like now, if you can get through that particular period with compassion and all that kind of thing, when they come out of it, that sort of fades away, right? So, but there's a reason why complaining about teens has been happening since recorded human history, right? So, like, if you're dealing with a child that doesn't seem to want to listen to you at this point because they're a teenager, just know that everything is kind of working the way it should. Now, what can we then do to deal with that? Because obviously, we still want to, in particular in today's day and age, we need to support them as parents. So, um, so let's look at a statement. Right. So when you go towards a teen and you say, "Look, I want to talk to you about how things went in school today," this is an important quote. Teens don't get defensive because of what you say, but why they think you say it. Right. So they are not like, so what the disconnect when you see defensive teens between a parent and that teen is that the parent thinks, okay, I'm genuinely asking you a question about how things went in school. And they think that you are asking that question because you want to meddle, or you are unhappy with how they're behaving, or whatever that is, right? So and that might actually be true. So let's get it wrong. A lot of them get it exactly right. That there's a lot of hidden questions behind a question like this. But even if you are genuine, it is not really important what you think your genuine thoughts are. What is important is what they think you are doing. So that is the basis of that initial conflict. So that's when the guards go up, and that's when they close down. So what do we need to do? Okay, so one thing that we then tend to do is, like, if they get into this stuff, the first thing is that we start saying, oh, the topic is probably difficult, right? So a lot of parents do, oh, he doesn't want to talk about school at all. And I often ask, well, what does he want to talk about? It's like, oh, actually, we don't talk about anything else or either. So, okay, well, that is probably because the topic is not really the issue. What you're dealing with is that there's basically some trust issues here, right? Again, they think you are trying to communicate something else. So what we need to do is we need to establish trust. And that is not necessarily easy, particularly because, like, again, like, most of us really have an ulterior motive, right? When we asking these questions, because again, we are thinking about that long game, like, oh, I'm worried about your grades, I'm worried about all these other kind of things. Therefore, we need to address this particular topic right now, right? So, like, when you ask this particular question, basically, if they don't trust you, um, they have either like a very angry response, or that if they're more passive, they will retreat, like they'll just be quiet. And like elements of like going back and forth in that, like if you try to change tactics and so on. So what we need to do is establish trust. And that really starts with what is really your intent. So are you genuinely interested in how they feel and what they're experiencing, or are you trying to correct some behavior that you think they need for their future? And if the answer is your intent is to do that particular other thing, which is like, okay, I want to get something else happening, then actually, like, if you don't want them to stop being defensive, you need to figure out a way how to let that go. Right? Like there is a time and place where you can get exactly what you want, but you can only get that with a non-defensive team if there is trust that the information that they're going to give you isn't used to sort of like, either punish them for things or like, have a lecture of stuff that they don't. And don't forget, like these lectures, they whenever we're giving these lectures, basically their brains are just going, oh my god, let's run away from this. Right, so a lot of this is chemical stuff. Like like a psychologist friend, he jokingly said, like when you work with teens, it's like the stuff that is the rewiring of the brain makes them technically clinically insane, as far as if you really would diagnose it. But we know they're teens, so it's kind of okay. Right, so there's a lot of weird stuff happening in their heads. Their brains are forming, and ironically, the important bits that we deem is important, particularly in boys, only really for the prefrontal cortex bits about logical thinking and the bits that link that to reasonable common sense, only develop between, I don't know, like in 19 to 21 years old. So like you're basically looking at like quite capable individuals in a lot of ways that just don't have the ability to really form reasonable thought yet. Right, so which is one of the reasons we have to protect them from stupid decisions, right? But again, like at the same time, they're trying to not listen to you. My daughter once said in the car, it's like this is when we were just having a normal conversation. Said, look, Dad, sometimes you say very, very reasonable things, and I hear them, and I think, yeah, like that's true. And then my brain just goes, I don't want to listen to you at all. And that is basically the nature of that. And with boys, it's just worse. So they're more inclined to it than the girls are. So again, what is your intent? And that means that like you need to maybe let go of this for now, because what you really need to do is you need to find common ground. Now, this is one of the reasons why last week I was so adamant about doing these meetings, these family meetings, because they are designed to really help you establish like a pattern of like, okay, giving each other nice compliments, and then bringing up agenda points in ways that will allow you to sort of let them tell you what they want to talk about. And what they want to talk about might not be the thing you want to talk about at times, but you'd be actually surprised that if you give them the opportunity to share things, they will. Okay, so that is the common grounds. What is that? Now, that is different for every one of you. So please listen to your kids. Ask them, like, what would you want to talk about? And then create situations that allow for that common ground to happen. So share stuff, right? And then yeah, that's always an interesting one. Maybe we need to listen a little bit more, right? So this can be hard if you have kids that are very introverted and you yourself are a little bit more extroverted, because they will often not talk at all. So you need to create a space of calm. And what that means is like, particularly if you have siblings, like if you have like loud siblings that sometimes like overshadow, always talk, always do things, then the more quiet ones will just revert and not speak up much. So one trick that you can do is like if you go out to the shop, like take a different child every time. And you'd be surprised if you do little activities like this and you actually give them a little bit of responsibility, because that's another big part of gaining trust. It's like, I'm going to give you some responsibility. We're going shopping and I want you to help me out with some stuff. Now, obviously, the older they get, the less interested they become. But actually, the older they get, you can make the responsibility things a little bit more bigger. Like, let's say, it's like, oh, I want to do. Right? Can you help me get some groceries and then we cook some stuff together? Right? So you create situations where you do stuff that isn't directly there. Again, this takes a bit of time. Like you need to create a space of calm, particularly for the introverted or calm kids, and then try to listen. Try not to constantly talk. Like if you create an opportunity to bite your tongue, you'll be surprised how much the kids actually start talking to you. And then, but positive discipline is very important. Where when they do behaviors that you like, you have to reinforce that behavior. So the way you do that particular thing, you basically start saying things like, "Oh yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's nice. Oh, I like when you tell me stuff that you enjoy." Right? And these little things, like initially they'll sound a bit weird if you're never used to saying things like that. But if once you get very good at like saying, "Oh, that's a nice thing you shared. Thanks for sharing that," you will get them to do it more. Because like a lot of the things that with teens that don't communicate with you anymore is that they feel like, like you haven't really been listening to me. You've just been preaching. Like every time I'm having this conversation, there's more rules, or like, like I'm checked out. So you have to build that particular trust. And with that, like that's really the last point in this, is like actions speak louder than words. And another way to phrase that is like, you can't talk yourself out of a way out of a situation with kids that you actioned yourself into, right? So if you are saying, "Oh, I want to listen to you," but you're not actually listening, they're not going to take it. So you need to learn how to listen, which is practice and basically doing things yourself. So there's a few tips that I want to bring in before we get to the end of the session. Is that so one analogy for trust is like is the a jar of marbles, where basically a jar of marbles when you start is kind of useless. There's nothing in there, right? And if you start every time you do a little action that helps you or helps them, or they feel like it aligns with like listening to them and building trust, you add a marble in there. And every time you break that trust, it's like somebody tips the marbles out of the jar and you have to start slowly building them in. So if you've basically been tipping the jar and the marbles are everywhere, and then you're trying to have a conversation about trust, it's just not there. You need to take some time to put all the marbles back into that jar. And it is very hard sometimes to know where you are in that particular thing. So one way to get there is to really start thinking about reverse empathy. So this is empathy itself is about like, okay, what does the other person feel? But when we're talking about reverse empathy, it's about being aware of what you think they feel about you, right? So are they feeling about you in the way that you think they are? And that's sort of like an extra little loop further. Because again, like sometimes like if you think, oh yeah, he's just feeling that itself, it's like, no, like what am I doing? Right. So how are my actions reflecting in his mind? So how does that build empathy? Right? Am I doing the things that I need to? Yeah. So now a little trick, that's the last tip I'm going to do for tonight, that really works, is if you have really a difficult relationship with the teens in that, and particularly if they just got into full-blown puberty, it's kind of hard. One way to get around that, and this is the kind of the saying, takes a village to raise a kid, right? Is that you need role models. Now, in traditional sense, a village used to have people with roughly the same kind of values in there, right? So kids would roam the streets, and then all adults would be either reprimanding or helping kids, and kids would normally find their role models within that kind of structure. But if, like, unfortunately, one of the reasons, like COVID and the way that particularly in Malaysia the people live together, is that like families are very like close knit, and then they'll meet somebody for a little bit and that's it. So what you actually need is you need some role models. So that means like you need to go find some friends where you feel like they have the same kind of values as you. And this is why like godparents or whatever equivalent in different cultures you have can be really good, because it's a great way for kids to spend some time with other adults that share values that you have, and you'll be surprised how much more they will listen to them, which is very frustrating. But it will work out if both of you have a set of kids, and basically you can basically be a bit of a mentor to both. So find some role models, right? Like what can they be? And one of the things that we try to do in our sessions with the kids is that we're trying to really become a mentor to them. I listen to them, see them. That's what the term my mom used. Like being seen and being heard is a key to getting these kids where they need to be. But yeah, those are the last 3 tips that I have for today. So unless there's any questions, still please speak out. If not, I will share this one as normal via our YouTube channel. And don't forget, if you want to rewatch some of the videos that we had from before, particularly last week, the family meeting was quite popular. So I would recommend for you guys to reach out to us. If you have got any other questions for next week, put them in the chats now, or put them in the form that we send to you. And look forward to seeing any of you in the flesh this week. Have a great evening.